I never expected her to show up, of all people, right then. The door creaked open and for a second I thought I was imagining it. My hands froze where they were, my breath caught halfway in my chest. Her eyes landed on me, and the air between us felt heavy, too heavy to breathe in. Time didn't just slow, it stopped, holding us in a strange stillness that made every heartbeat sound like a drum in my ears. I couldn't read her face. Was it shock? Confusion? Something else I didn't dare hope for? My mind scrambled for the right words, but none came. She just stood there, framed in the doorway, and the silence between us stretched so long it felt like it could break me. All the little secrets I had carried in my chest, the ones I thought were hidden so well, suddenly felt like they were glowing in neon above my head. I could almost hear the unspoken question in her eyes, and I wished I could answer it without tearing my own heart open. But all I did was stare back, because in that moment, speaking felt dangerous. The door swung wider, letting in a faint draft that made the tiny hairs on my arms stand up. She stepped inside, her presence filling the room in a way that made my chest feel tight. My throat felt dry, my tongue heavy, like if I tried to speak, the words would get stuck halfway out. She wasn't supposed to be here, not now, not when I was already tangled in my own thoughts. Her eyes moved slowly, scanning the room before resting on me, and I could see the confusion in her face, like she was trying to fit together pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know existed. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. I gripped the edge of the table behind me, nails digging into the wood, trying to keep myself grounded. I wanted to say something, anything, that would make this moment less unbearable, but every phrase that formed in my mind sounded like a confession. She took a few more steps, her shoes making soft, deliberate sounds on the floor. It was like the space between us was shrinking and expanding all at once. I could feel the warmth of her so close, and it made my skin buzz with the kind of awareness you can't switch off. For months, I'd been carrying this weight inside me, the way my chest tightened when she laughed, the way my heart ached when she touched my arm or brushed her hair back with that absent-minded grace. I told myself she could never know, because she was, well, straight. That's what she'd always been, what she'd told me, what the world told me to accept without question. But in that moment, with her looking at me like I was hiding something she wanted to uncover, the line between what I believed and what I wanted blurred. I remembered the way her smile had caught me off guard the first time we met, the way I'd memorized the shape of her lips without even meaning to. I remembered every late-night conversation, every shared secret, every time I'd wanted to say, "It's you," but didn't. Now, she was standing right here, looking at me like I'd left the door unlocked to a room I never meant her to see. My mind kept flashing between fear and longing. If I told her, I could lose her. If I didn't, I might lose myself. Her brow furrowed slightly, and she opened her mouth as if to speak, then stopped, her gaze flickering to my hands gripping the table. The silence wrapped around us, thick and almost unbearable. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, in my temples, everywhere. I swallowed hard, still searching for the courage to make this moment mean something other than panic. But she kept staring, and I kept holding on, and in that fragile, breathless space, I knew something between us had already shifted, whether I wanted it to or not. I could feel my lips parting, the beginning of an explanation I wasn't even sure how to give, but the words seemed to crumble before they reached the air. She tilted her head just slightly, and that tiny gesture somehow made my chest ache more than anything else. "I can explain," the words slipped out of me in a whisper so quiet I almost wondered if I'd imagined saying them. Her eyes softened, but not in a way that made me feel safe, more like she was studying me, searching for something I wasn't sure I could offer her. My mind spun back to earlier that day, before this moment had cracked everything open. I had been fine, or at least I thought I was. I'd woken up to the sound of rain against my window, and for a moment, I let myself sink into that quiet, cozy feeling. I made coffee, sat at my desk, and tried to distract myself with work, but she had texted me mid-morning. Just something small, want to hang out later? But it had been enough to send a ripple through my chest. I told myself it was nothing, just a friend asking to spend time together. But my hands had shaken a little as I typed back sure. I'd been aware of her all day, even before she arrived. The scent of her perfume lingered in my memory, the way her laugh seemed to break through any fog in my head. I'd told myself over and over not to read too much into it, but wanting something makes you see signs everywhere, even when they're not really there. That's what made this moment so unbearable, because part of me thought maybe I hadn't been imagining everything. Now she was here, standing so close I could see the faint freckles across her cheeks, the slight curve of her lips as she pressed them together like she was holding back words of her own. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to rewind to the first time she'd sat beside me on the couch, our knees brushing, and how that small touch had sent a current through my whole body. I wanted to tell her about the nights I couldn't sleep because I kept thinking about what it would be like to kiss her, to see her look at me the way I looked at her when she wasn't paying attention. But each time I opened my mouth, fear shoved the truth back down. What if she pulled away? What if this was the moment she realized I wasn't the person she thought I was? I saw her glance toward the chair across from me, like she was deciding whether to sit down or keep standing over me. That small hesitation felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I wanted her closer, but I was afraid of what closeness might reveal. My stomach churned, my palms damp against the wood of the table. I tried to steady my breathing, but every inhale felt like it carried too much weight. "It's not what you think," I murmured, though even I didn't know if that was true. She didn't move. She just looked at me with that same searching expression, as if she could see all the unspoken feelings swirling inside me. And maybe she could. Because in that heavy silence, I realized my body was giving me away, the way I leaned toward her without meaning to, the way my eyes kept darting to her lips before I caught myself. I felt naked in a way that had nothing to do with clothing, like she could read my thoughts if she wanted to, and maybe she already had. The rain outside had grown louder, filling the room with a soft, steady rhythm, but it only made the space between us feel sharper. My chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, my fingers twitching as if they wanted to reach for her but didn't dare. I didn't know how long we stood there like that, her staring at me holding myself still, both of us caught in a moment that felt fragile enough to shatter. All I knew was that the silence was no longer just silence, it was a question, a possibility, a crack in the walls I had built to keep her out. And if I wasn't careful, it was going to break wide open. The quiet between us had stretched so far it felt like a living thing, breathing in the corners of the room, pressing against my chest. She finally broke it, not with words, but with the smallest shift of her body, like she was leaning in without even realizing it. That tiny movement made my pulse thud painfully in my ears. I swallowed hard, my throat so tight it was almost painful. I knew I couldn't keep dodging this, couldn't keep hiding behind half-truths and nervous smiles. My voice came out low and uneven. "There's something I need to tell you." I saw her lips part, but she didn't speak, just kept her gaze locked on mine. That look, that patient but piercing focus, felt like it could strip me bare. My mind started spinning back through years, like my confession had already pulled me into a current I couldn't fight. I was back in that small coffee shop on a cold winter afternoon, the first time I noticed her in a way I couldn't explain. She'd been laughing at something the barista said, her head tilted back, her eyes crinkling at the edges, and I remember thinking it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself she was just a friend, and friends could notice things like that without it meaning more. But then there was the day she called me crying after a fight with her boyfriend, and I held her in my arms, feeling the tremble in her shoulders. I'd wanted to kiss the tears from her cheeks, but instead I just held her tighter, telling myself she didn't need to know what I wanted. That had been the story of us, me loving quietly, carefully, always afraid of crossing a line she didn't even know existed. My palms were sweating now, my heart pounding so fast it was making me dizzy. I could feel the words building, pressing against my lips. I like you. More than a friend. They came out raw, unpolished, the kind of truth that can't be softened no matter how gently you say it. She blinked, her eyebrows pulling together, and for a second I thought she might laugh or recoil. But she didn't. She just stared at me like she was turning those words over in her mind, testing how they felt. The weight of her silence was unbearable. My stomach knotted, and I had to grip the table to keep from trembling. Every second felt like it was dragging a mile behind it. I could see her taking a slow breath, her chest rising and falling, her eyes never leaving mine. And then she did something I didn't expect, she stepped closer. Not a lot, just enough that I could smell the faint sweetness of her shampoo, enough that the air between us warmed. My pulse went wild, my knees felt unsteady. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then looked down at my hands gripping the table like they were my only lifeline. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, careful. I don't know what to say. Her words should have been a warning, but the way she said them, almost like she didn't want to hurt me, left a small spark of hope in my chest. I nodded slowly, my eyes burning. You don't have to say anything right now. But inside, I was already bracing myself for the possibility that silence would be her answer. My confession hung in the air between us, fragile as glass, and I could feel it trembling, waiting for her to decide whether to hold it or let it shatter. She didn't move away. That was the first thing I noticed, and maybe the most important. She could have stepped back, put a wall between us, let the space swallow what I had just confessed. But she stayed exactly where she was, close enough for me to catch the slow rise and fall of her breathing, close enough for the warmth of her to seep into my skin. My heart kept thudding in my ears, each beat almost louder than the rain outside. I didn't know if her stillness meant she was frozen in shock or if she was choosing not to retreat. That uncertainty was a weight pressing on my chest, but it was also the only thing keeping me standing. I could see the thoughts flicker across her face like shadows, each one gone before I could read it. Her eyes darted to the side for just a second, as though she was looking for something to anchor her, and then came back to mine. There was a pause, one of those pauses that feels like the world is holding its breath, before she took a step toward me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of move that made your heart leap because it was bold. It was small, almost hesitant, but it brought her close enough that the distance between our hands was nothing but an inch of air. I didn't dare move. I didn't want to scare her off or push her into deciding too quickly. My fingers curled slightly, the urge to reach for her almost unbearable, but I kept them still. Her voice came softly, almost as if she was testing each word before letting it leave her mouth. I didn't expect that. There was no anger in her tone, no sharp edge, just something that felt like a mix of surprise and uncertainty. I gave a slow nod, my throat tightening as I swallowed. I know, I said quietly, because there wasn't much else to say. I could feel my body relaxing and tensing at the same time, relieved she hadn't pulled away, terrified of what might come next. She glanced down for a moment, and a faint smile tugged at her lips, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was softer, almost like she was remembering something. You've always been different, she said, and the way she said different didn't sound like an insult. It sounded like she'd just found a missing piece of something she'd been holding for a long time. I felt heat rising in my chest, an ache that was equal parts longing and fear. We stood there in that charged stillness, and my mind began pulling up every memory we'd made together. Sitting in the park on summer afternoons, sharing music through a single pair of earbuds. Late nights when we'd stay up talking until one of us fell asleep mid-sentence. The way she'd look at me sometimes, like she was about to say something but thought better of it. Those moments had always felt special, but I had trained myself not to see them as more than friendship. Now, standing this close to her, I couldn't stop myself from wondering if maybe she had felt it too, even if she didn't recognize it until now. She reached up to brush a loose strand of hair from her face, her hand trembling just slightly, and my eyes followed the motion without meaning to. My pulse jumped at the thought of what it would feel like if her fingers brushed against my cheek instead. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, unsure if I was allowed to break the space between us. She looked at me again, her gaze steady now, and I saw something there that made my breath catch, curiosity, maybe, or something deeper she wasn't ready to name. And then, without a word, her hand drifted just enough that her fingertips grazed mine. The touch was barely there, a whisper of contact, but it sent a rush of warmth through my entire body. I wanted to hold on to her hand, to close that space completely, but I was afraid of ruining the fragile balance we'd found. So I let the moment hang, my skin still tingling from that brief connection, my mind screaming with all the things I wasn't saying. The rain outside softened, the patter fading into something gentler, and for a fleeting second, the world felt still again, like it was waiting to see what we would do next. Her fingertips had only grazed mine, but the ghost of that touch lingered like a spark that refused to fade. I couldn't stop replaying it in my head, the warmth of her skin, the way it seemed almost accidental yet carried an unspoken meaning I was too scared to assume. My heart was still racing, though I was trying hard to keep my breathing steady, not wanting her to hear the way this moment was unraveling me from the inside out. She didn't pull away immediately, and that alone felt like a miracle. Her hand hovered there, close enough that the air between us seemed to hum, before she finally let it fall back to her side. She looked down, almost like she needed a moment to gather her thoughts, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "This changes things." The words sent a shiver down my spine, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Everything had already changed, even if neither of us knew what that meant yet. I swallowed hard, my voice catching as I asked, "In a bad way?" Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and she shook her head just slightly, the corners of her lips twitching like she was trying to hold back something, maybe a smile, maybe tears. "I don't know yet," she admitted, and the honesty in her tone was like a knife and a comfort at the same time. I let out a shaky breath, nodding because I didn't trust my voice. I could feel the weight of all the years we'd spent as friends pressing down on this one fragile moment. If I pushed too hard, I could break it. If I didn't push at all, I might lose the chance to ever know what could have been. The rain had stopped outside, but the air still smelled like damp earth and wet pavement, a scent that felt both calming and strangely electric. She shifted her weight, her body turning slightly toward the window as if she needed a break from the intensity of my gaze. I watched the way her profile softened in the fading light, how her eyelashes cast delicate shadows on her cheeks. Every detail felt magnified, every second stretched out like the universe was giving me time to memorize her exactly as she was right now. "I care about you," she said suddenly, still looking toward the glass. Her voice had that careful quality again, the kind that meant she was choosing her words like stepping stones in a river, afraid of slipping. Probably more than I should. My breath caught at that, my chest tightening as though her words had reached directly inside me. "Then why does it feel like we're standing on opposite sides of something we can't cross?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her head turned back toward me, and there was something in her expression that made my stomach flip, a mix of vulnerability and restraint, like she wanted to step closer but didn't know if it was safe. Because I've never thought about this. Not like that, she admitted, her voice dropping even lower. And now I can't stop thinking about it. Her confession settled between us like a match waiting to be struck. I could feel the air change, heavier yet warmer, charged with something we hadn't dared name until now. My instinct screamed at me to close the distance, to take her hand, to show her what I'd been feeling for so long. But my fear held me in place. What if she was only curious? What if this was a fleeting thought for her and not the kind of deep, aching truth it was for me? I wanted her, but I didn't want to become just an experiment she'd forget when the novelty wore off. My voice trembled as I said, I don't want to lose you. Whatever happens, I can't lose you. She looked at me for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. You won't, she said, but even she didn't sound entirely sure. And yet, when her fingers brushed mine again, this time lingering just a little longer, I let myself believe her, even if only for tonight. The morning after felt different in a way I couldn't name. It wasn't like the world had shifted on its axis, but there was a subtle weight in the air, something unspoken pressing against my skin. I woke early, long before the sun was fully up, the pale light creeping across my room like it was trying not to wake me. But I was already awake, my mind replaying every second from the night before. Her voice saying she cared more than she should. The way her fingers had lingered just slightly longer the second time they touched mine. The look in her eyes, curious, uncertain, but undeniably there. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling a knot of anticipation and dread in my stomach. I wanted to talk to her again, but the thought of saying the wrong thing made my throat tighten. What if she'd had time to think and realized she regretted letting things go that far? What if she decided the safest thing was to step back into the neat boundaries of friendship and never cross them again? My phone sat on the nightstand, a silent weight I couldn't ignore. I picked it up more than once, my thumb hovering over her name, before setting it down again. I didn't know what to say, something casual felt dishonest, but something too heavy might scare her off. By mid-morning, the quiet was unbearable. I typed a message, erased it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I sent just 2 words, "You okay?" The 3 little dots appeared almost immediately, then vanished, then came back again. My heart pounded each time they flickered on the screen, as if every second she took to respond was a clue to how she felt. Finally, her reply came, "Yeah. Just thinking." Thinking. My stomach twisted at the word. It could mean anything, and it terrified me. I stared at the message, wondering if I should push for more or give her the space she seemed to want. Before I could decide, another bubble appeared. "Can we talk later?" Relief washed through me, but it was tangled with nerves. I typed of course and left it at that. The rest of the day moved like molasses. I tried to keep myself busy, but every thought circled back to her, what she might say, what I would say back, whether we could find our way through this without breaking what we had. By the time evening came, my chest felt tight with anticipation. We met at a small cafe we'd been to countless times before, but tonight it felt different. The air inside was warm and smelled faintly of coffee beans and cinnamon, the low hum of conversation around us making the space feel cocooned and private. She was already sitting at a corner table when I walked in, her hands wrapped around a mug like she needed its warmth to steady her. She looked up as I approached, and her smile was faint but real. I sat down across from her, my fingers curling around my own mug even though I hadn't taken a sip yet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I've been trying to understand what last night meant." Her words were careful, deliberate. "And?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. She glanced away for a second before meeting my eyes again. "It didn't scare me," she said. "It surprised me. But I keep thinking about it, about you." My heart lurched at her honesty, but I forced myself to stay still, to let her finish. "I don't know what this is supposed to look like," she continued, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "But I know I don't want to pretend nothing happened." That single sentence cracked something open in me, a cautious hope I'd been trying not to feel too strongly. I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady but soft. "I don't need us to define it right now. I just don't want to lose whatever this is." She gave a small nod, her lips pressing into a line that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't rejection either. For a while, we just sat there, letting the quiet settle between us in a way that felt less like tension and more like possibility. When I left the cafe that night, I realized my chest felt lighter, but my heart was still beating a little too fast, as if it knew this was only the beginning of something neither of us fully understood. The following weekend arrived faster than I expected, and yet every hour leading up to it had felt slow, stretched, like the world was deliberately making me sit with my thoughts. She'd asked if we could meet somewhere quieter this time, away from the cafe and the hum of other people's voices. I agreed before even asking where, because there was a softness in her tone that told me this conversation wasn't one I should delay. We ended up at the park, the one where we'd spent countless afternoons in summers past, sprawled out on the grass with music humming through shared earbuds. Now, in the cooler air of early evening, the park was mostly empty. The sun was low, casting that golden light that makes everything look softer, gentler. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on one of the worn wooden benches, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, and there was a brief flicker of something in her eyes, nervousness, maybe, or anticipation. I sat down beside her, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her, but not so close that it would push her into deciding too soon which way this was going to go. For a few minutes, we didn't speak. We just sat there, watching the wind move through the branches overhead, the leaves shivering like they were carrying their own secrets. Eventually, she drew in a breath and said, "I've been thinking about us a lot." The way she said us made my stomach clench. "And?" I asked, my voice quiet, careful not to push. She didn't look at me right away, her gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. "I keep going back to all those moments we had before last week. The little things I never paid attention to before. And now I can't help but wonder if I missed something." My throat felt tight. "Like what?" Her lips curved in the smallest, almost reluctant smile. "Like the way you'd always know when something was wrong with me, even when I didn't say it. Or how you'd look at me when you thought I wasn't paying attention." She turned her head then, her eyes locking on mine. I'd been asking myself if maybe I did notice, but I didn't let myself see it for what it was. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, my whole body on alert for whatever she might say next. "And what do you see now?" The question slipped out before I could second-guess it. She leaned back slightly, her hands gripping the edge of the bench like she needed the grounding. "I see someone who's been in my life for years, who's been steady and kind and, more important to me than I realized. And I see that maybe I'm more drawn to you than I thought I could be." My chest tightened so much it almost hurt, but in the best way. I searched her face for hesitation, for signs that this was just her trying to soften the truth before turning me down, but what I found instead was sincerity, uncertain, yes, but real. The wind picked up, tugging at her hair, and without thinking, I reached up to tuck a strand behind her ear. My fingers brushed her skin, and she didn't flinch. She didn't move away. In fact, her eyes softened, and for a moment, it felt like the space between us had disappeared. We stayed like that for a few seconds, her gaze holding mine, and I could see the question in her expression, the same one burning inside me. Neither of us leaned in, but neither of us pulled back. It was a delicate balance, one we both seemed afraid to break. Finally, she smiled, a small, hesitant thing, but enough to send warmth rushing through me. "I don't know where this will go," she admitted, "but I want to find out." Those words landed in me like a promise I'd been waiting years to hear. I nodded slowly, my voice low. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." And as the last of the sunlight dipped behind the trees, we sat there in a silence that no longer felt heavy or uncertain, but open, like the beginning of something that could finally grow. The days that followed felt quieter, but not in the way silence used to scare me. It was the kind of quiet that hummed beneath the surface, full of unspoken understanding, like a thread connecting us even when we weren't in the same room. I found myself smiling at random moments, while making coffee, while walking to work, because I'd remember the way she looked at me in the park, the softness in her voice when she said she wanted to find out where this could go. It wasn't a grand declaration or a promise carved in stone, but it was real, and for the first time, that was enough. We didn't rush into anything. There were no sudden changes in how we moved around each other. No dramatic shifts that made it feel like we'd stepped into a different version of our lives. Instead, it was small things, the way her messages started coming more often during the day, the way our conversations lingered longer into the night, the way her goodbyes always carried just a little more weight. One afternoon, she came over with 2 mugs of tea and a book she thought I'd like. We sat on the couch, close enough for our knees to touch, and read in comfortable silence. Every so often, she'd point out a line she liked, and I'd catch myself watching her lips move instead of reading the words. She noticed once, meeting my eyes and holding the gaze for a heartbeat longer than she needed to. There was no teasing, no awkwardness, just that shared awareness we were both still learning how to hold. A week later, we went for a walk in the late evening, the air cool and the streetlights casting pools of gold on the pavement. She slipped her hands into her pockets, her shoulders brushing mine every few steps. At one point, she stopped, turning to look at me with an expression I couldn't read at first. Then, almost shyly, she reached out and took my hand. No hesitation, no accidental brush of fingers, just a deliberate choice. My breath caught, and for a moment, I couldn't move. Her hand was warm, steady, and when I finally squeezed back, she smiled like she'd been waiting for me to do that all along. We walked like that for a while, not speaking, just letting the sound of our footsteps and the rhythm of our joined hands fill the space. When we reached her building, we lingered by the steps, neither of us quite ready to say goodnight. She let go of my hand slowly, her thumb grazing the inside of my wrist before she pulled away. "I'll see you tomorrow?" she asked, her voice light but her eyes holding that same unspoken question from before. I nodded, my chest warm. "Yeah. Tomorrow." As I walked home, the cool air biting at my cheeks, I realized that everything had shifted, not in a way that needed to be labeled or defined yet, but in a way that made the ground feel steadier beneath my feet. She wasn't just my friend anymore. She was something more, something unfolding between us at its own pace, and I didn't need to know exactly where it would end to know I wanted to keep walking beside her. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever found yourself standing on the edge of something unexpected, something that scared you and thrilled you all at once, know that you're not alone. Love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks, sometimes it's a quiet hand in yours on a cool evening, a promise without words. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and let me know your thoughts below. And if you want to join me for more stories like this, don't forget to follow along. Your story matters, too. If this story made you feel something, even for a moment, take a second to like this video. It helps more than you know. Share it with a friend who loves heartfelt true stories, and don't forget to subscribe for more real, raw, and emotional moments like this one. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had a friendship that turned into something more? I'd love to read your story.